Imagine sitting in a lawyer's office, listening to a grandfather's will being read, and hearing every single cousin, aunt, uncle, and family friend get something, while she, the granddaughter who spent every weekend caring for him for 3 years, got absolutely nothing. Not a dime, not a keepsake, not even an explanation. We're talking old money, not billionaire status, but comfortable. Her grandfather, Joseph Whitmore, built a successful construction company in the 1960s that he eventually sold for about $12 million. Not bad for a guy who started with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox. Grandpa Joe was the kind of man who worked 7 days a week until he was 70, then spent his retirement spoiling his grandkids and traveling with his wife. When Grandma died in 2019, the whole family rallied around him. Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, the works. But here's where she was different from the rest of her cousins. While they showed up for the fun stuff, she was there for the hard stuff too. See, after Grandma's death, Grandpa Joe started declining. Not mentally, he was sharp as a tack until the day he died, but physically he was struggling. Arthritis, heart problems, diabetes. The man needed help with basic daily tasks. Her cousins, they lived their busy lives. Her Aunt Linda and Uncle Richard were too wrapped up in their social climbing to be bothered. Her cousin Derek was building his career in finance. Her cousin Amanda was focusing on her young family. But her, she was there every Saturday and Sunday for 3 years, grocery shopping, cooking meals, organizing his medications, driving him to doctor appointments. We're talking about real, unglamorous caregiving work that nobody else wanted to do. And Grandpa Joe noticed. He'd tell her all the time how grateful he was, how she was his angel, how he didn't know what he'd do without her. He even started joking that she was going to inherit the whole house because she was the only one who actually cared about him. She thought he was kidding. Turns out he wasn't. Grandpa Joe passed away on a Tuesday morning in March 2024. Peaceful, in his sleep, exactly how he would have wanted it. She was devastated. This man had been like a second father to her. The funeral was huge. We're talking packed church, flower arrangements everywhere, people flying in from 3 different states. And suddenly, all her cousins and aunts and uncles were sobbing and giving speeches about how much they loved Grandpa Joe and how he was the heart of their family. Meanwhile, she was sitting there thinking, where were you people when he needed help getting dressed? But whatever, grief makes people weird, and she figured everyone was just processing in their own way. The weird part came after the funeral. Suddenly, nobody was talking to her. She'd text her cousin Amanda about getting together to go through Grandpa's things, and Amanda would respond with one-word answers. She'd call her Aunt Linda to ask about planning the estate sale, and Linda would say she was too busy to talk. Within 2 weeks, she'd gone from being the primary caregiver to being completely frozen out of all family decisions. They were making plans for cleaning out the house, dividing up personal items, handling the estate, and nobody was including her in any of it. That's when her Uncle Richard called her. "Sophie," he said, and his voice had this weird formal tone she'd never heard before. "We need to talk." He asked him to meet for coffee, and the second she sat down, she could tell something was seriously wrong. "Look," he said, not even bothering with small talk, "there's no easy way to say this. Grandpa Joe's will is being read next week, and you're not getting anything." She stared at him. "What do you mean I'm not getting anything?" "I mean, you're not in the will, Sophie. He left everything to the rest of the family." The coffee shop suddenly felt like it was spinning. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "I was with him constantly. He told me multiple times that he was going to take care of me." Richard shifted uncomfortably. Well, apparently he changed his mind. When? When did he change his mind? "Look, I don't know all the details, but Linda hired a lawyer, and they've reviewed everything. The will is clear. You're not mentioned." And then he dropped the real bomb. "Sophie, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you ever pressure Grandpa Joe for money? Did you ever make him feel like he owed you something for taking care of him?" She could feel her face getting hot. Are you seriously asking me if I manipulated a dying old man? I'm just trying to understand why you'd assume you were getting an inheritance. Because he told me I was, because I spent 3 years of my life making sure he wasn't alone. Richard sighed. Maybe he was just saying that to make you feel appreciated. Old people do that sometimes. She walked out of that coffee shop feeling like she'd been punched in the stomach. The will reading was exactly as humiliating as you'd expect. She showed up to the lawyer's office, and everyone else was already there, sitting in this semicircle like they were at a board meeting. The lawyer, Mr. Davidson, started reading, and it was like listening to everyone else's Christmas morning while she sat in the corner with nothing. Amanda got the house in Cape Cod and $50,000. Derek got the main house and $100,000. Linda got all the jewelry and antiques and $75,000. Richard got the remaining investments and stocks. Even the housekeeper got $5,000 and a personal note thanking her for her service. Her? Nothing. Not even a mention. But here's where it got interesting. As Mr. Davidson was reading, she noticed something weird. The will was dated January 15th, 2024, just 2 months before Grandpa Joe died. That was strange, because in December 2023, Grandpa Joe had specifically told her he'd updated his will to include her. He'd even mentioned going to see that lawyer downtown to make changes. After the reading, she approached Mr. Davidson. "Excuse me," she said, "but I'm a little confused about the timeline. My grandfather mentioned updating his will in December. Is it possible there's a more recent version?" Mr. Davidson looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but this is the only will we have on file. It was delivered to us by your Aunt Linda as the executor." "Delivered by Linda? Don't you usually keep wills in your office?" "Well, yes, typically, but in this case, Mrs. Chen brought us the will along with a letter from your grandfather explaining that he'd kept it at home for safekeeping." Red flags were going off in her head like crazy. "Can I see the letter?" "I'm sorry, but that's confidential family business." She walked out of that office knowing something was seriously wrong. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the timeline, about how her family suddenly turned cold after the funeral, about how Linda was suddenly the executor when Grandpa Joe had never mentioned that before. So she decided to do something that probably sounded crazy. She hired her own lawyer. She met with this woman, Elena Rodriguez, who specialized in estate disputes. She told her the whole story, and Elena got this look on her face like she'd seen this movie before. "Sophie," she said, "I've handled cases like this. When a family suddenly turns against one member after a death, especially when that member was the primary caregiver, it's usually because someone has something to hide." She explained that they could contest the will, but they'd need evidence. And the first step was getting access to Grandpa Joe's medical records and financial documents. If someone coerced your grandfather or forged documents, there will be a paper trail, she says. So they start digging. First, they request Grandpa Joe's medical records. Turns out, in January 2024, right around when this mysterious will was supposedly written, Grandpa Joe was in the hospital for a week with pneumonia. He was on oxygen and pain medication the entire time. Not exactly the ideal mental state for making major legal decisions. Next, they look at his financial records. And boom, they find something interesting. On January 20, 2024, just 5 days after the will was supposedly signed, someone withdrew $15,000 in cash from Grandpa Joe's checking account. The withdrawal was made at a branch across town from where he lived at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, during the exact time he was supposed to be at physical therapy. But here's the kicker. The security camera footage from the bank shows Linda making the withdrawal with a signed check. Armed with this information, Elena and Sophie decide to confront Linda directly. They show up at her house on a Saturday morning, and the second she sees Elena, her face goes white. "Linda," Elena says, We need to talk about your father's will. Linda tries to play dumb. I don't know what you mean. Everything was handled properly. Really? Because we have bank records showing you withdrew $15,000 from his account using a check signed while he was hospitalized and medicated. Linda's hands are literally shaking. He asked me to get that money for him. He needed cash for something. What did he need $15,000 in cash for while he was in the hospital? I don't remember exactly. Elena pulls out another document. We also have his medical records showing he was heavily sedated during the time this will was supposedly signed. Are you telling me he was competent to make legal decisions while on morphine and oxygen? And then Linda breaks. She starts crying and admits that yes, she forged the will, but she claims it was because Grandpa Joe had told her he wanted to change it, and she was just helping him do what he intended. He was sick and confused, she says. He kept talking about leaving everything to Sophie, just because she spent time with him. But that wasn't fair to the rest of us. We're his children, too. Elena looks at Sophie with this expression like, "Are you hearing this? So you decided to forge a legal document and steal your niece's inheritance because you thought your father was being too generous?" Linda realizes she's just confessed to multiple felonies and tries to backtrack, but it's too late. Once Linda admitted to forging the will, everything else started falling apart like a house of cards. Turns out she hadn't acted alone. Richard knew about the forgery and had helped her cover it up. Derek had been in on the whole thing and had already spent some of his inheritance on a new car. But the $15,000 Linda withdrew, that wasn't just random theft. She'd used it to pay off a gambling debt that her husband didn't know about. When they discovered this, her husband filed for divorce immediately. Richard's involvement came to light during the investigation, and his wife, who had no idea he'd helped steal from his own father's estate, also filed for divorce. Derek's wife found out about his participation when the police showed up at their house with a warrant. She kicked him out that same day. Within 3 months, 3 marriages in their family had imploded. But wait, it gets better. When the real will was finally found, hidden in Grandpa Joe's bedroom closet, exactly where he'd told Sophie he kept important documents, it was everything he'd promised her. The house, half the money, and all his personal items, with a note that said, "To Sophie, who loved me enough to stay when everyone else was too busy to care." Linda and Richard were both charged with fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Linda got 18 months in prison. Richard got probation and had to pay massive fines. Derek was charged as an accessory and got community service, but his reputation in the finance world was destroyed. But here's where the story gets really satisfying. Remember how they all thought they were getting these big inheritances? Well, when the real will came to light, they all had to pay back every penny they'd already spent, plus legal fees, plus damages. Amanda had to sell the Cape Cod house she'd already moved into. Derek had to return the car and take out loans to pay back the money. Linda lost her own house trying to cover her legal fees. Meanwhile, Sophie inherited a beautiful Victorian home worth over $800,000, plus investments worth about $600,000 more. But the best part? The note Grandpa Joe left with the real will. "To my family," it read, "If you're reading this, it means someone tried to cheat Sophie out of what I intended for her. Sophie was the only one who loved me for who I was, not what I had. She deserves everything I'm giving her and more. And to whoever tried to steal from her, you should be ashamed of yourselves." It was like he knew exactly what they'd tried to do. That was 8 months ago. Sophie has moved into Grandpa Joe's house, which she's renovated into her dream home. She's used part of the inheritance to start a nonprofit that helps elderly people who don't have family support. Her cousins? Amanda works at a grocery store now and lives in a studio apartment. Derek moved back in with his parents and drives a 15-year-old Honda. Linda got out of prison last month and is living with her sister because she has nowhere else to go. None of them have apologized, not once. But you know what? Sophie doesn't need their apologies. Because every morning when she wakes up in the house that Grandpa Joe meant for her to have, she's reminded that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who will hurt you the worst. And sometimes the best revenge isn't plotting or scheming. Sometimes it's just living the life that someone who actually loved you wanted you to have. Her family excluded her from the will because they thought she didn't deserve anything. But in the end, their greed and dishonesty gave her everything and cost them everything. Grandpa Joe used to say, "The truth has a way of coming out, Sophie. Always bet on the truth." He was right. And now she's living proof that sometimes when people try to bury you, they forget that you might just be a seed. If you have a story you want to share, make sure to email it to me.